Welcome to the Data Center Hawk podcast. Today we're taking questions from our viewers, and David Liggett will answer them, not live, but without any pre-screening. Very minimal pre-screening.
And you're going to answer them too.
I will help answer.
That's right.
I will do my best to help answer them.
Dream team.
You're listening to the Data Center Hawk podcast, where we demystify the data center market. Data Center Hawk is your online platform for data and commentary on the data center market. Stay tuned and be sure to join the thousands of others who rely on Data Center Hawk to make decisions in the data center space.
Okay, so these are real questions from real people, we think, although they may have used fake names when they submitted the comments. As I read, the first one is from Mr. Kilowatt. I think that is probably
He's a great guy.
I think that is probably not this person's real
Mr.
name.
Kilowatt.
So anyways, good questions. I think this is great to talk about what people are actually, like, real people have real questions about, not just stuff that we make up, little straw men that we prop up.
Yeah, the fake people in our heads.
Annihilate for the benefit of the pod. So,
Yes.
All right, let's get going. First question is actually from Mr. Kilowatt. I'm not going to read everybody's name. This one's funny, though. He goes, I keep reading stuff about modular data centers and how the new tech will enable modularity in constructing new data centers. Any info on that would be great. Not much out there yet.
So a couple of things I think are important to highlight when you're talking about the modular concept. You know, one is just as it relates to construction. I mean, you know, if you look at like the publicly traded REITs or like other privately owned data center operators, I mean, they are using modular development off-site, and then they're actually bringing those, you know, modular units into data center facilities so they can quickly deploy infrastructure. So they don't have to do it all on site. They can assemble it off site and bring it in. And they're actually, I'm happy to tell Mr. Kilowatt, there's probably more out there than he thinks. Or you could actually listen to some of the construction teams that talk about how the space has evolved, and there is some good information on that in the market. I think so. So that's one point. The second thing I would say is that this highlights kind of the offsite and the deployment and being able to do this, you know, anywhere, highlights really the discussion the industry's having around the edge development right now, and what that, not only conceptually what that solves, but also the physical product that solves. And, you know, we've seen a number of, you know, companies invest, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars into building those concepts and getting them ready to deploy when customers need them. There is a modular concept out there that they can solve.
Yeah, I think what we've seen there is like shipping container size, you know, 200 to 300 kilowatts. Typical application would be you set one of those at the base of a cell tower.
Right.
Like that's a very typical edge application. You know, I think what this reminded me of is I think you did a podcast, I think it was with Bruce Lehrman from Involta.
Yep.
And he's like, hey, we spent the last 20 years taking everything,
putting in one place,
decentralized, and putting it in one place. He goes, I think the next 20 years is going to be pushing everything out.
Yeah.
So certainly the edge as a concept is not going anywhere.
Right.
Because there's a need for more rapid deployment.
Yes, but I think as it relates to like modular under construction, there are companies today, you know, construction companies today, data center operators that are building these concepts offsite, and then they're able to bring them in and basically like slide them in and plug and play. That's a simplified way of looking at it, but you know, that shows the evolution of how data center facilities have been built over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and it's certainly a reflection of the need for rapid deployment.
Yep.
So, all right.
Speed to market.
Next one. So this is talking about technology, which is, you know, as we know, evolving. So he says, can data centers be outdated as soon as technology improves to the point that one day we will have military-grade servers that are as small as a grain of sand? Maybe just a smidge of hyperbole there, but I think with the question where we would tackle that is like around the density piece. Like, how do we see, you know, increasing rack density,
Yeah.
you know, impacting data center development?
Yeah. And I think there are a number of things that impact that. I mean, that's one of them is the rack density. Another would be things like, you know, liquid immersion cooling and how much more you can cool in liquid type technologies. You know, the question really points to like, hey, as technology gets better, typically you can put more into less, more power into more infrastructure, storage, et cetera, into a smaller physical thing. So I think we've seen that play out at some point as you think about like how enterprise, like companies used to build data centers for themselves, and they don't really do that anymore. There's a new approach, but the comment is also maybe not giving enough credibility or credit to the fact that we're also using like data exponentially. We're producing, I forget the metric, but it's like 2 times more data on an annual basis now, and than it was. Then if you look at the last like 10 or 15 years. So I think there's a combination there that you have to like consider. And you also have to consider, hey, when enterprises are no longer building data centers, it doesn't mean they don't have demand. It just means they're putting that demand in different places. So is it appropriate to pay attention to the technologies that are changing maybe the way data center facilities are built? Absolutely. But I don't think you can do that and ignore the fact that businesses, consumers are using data in ways they never have before.
Yeah, I think you've mentioned on this pod before, like rack density is a glacier, not a flood, and it has upticked over time.
So,
and there may be a point in time which what is currently now a full rack of servers is going forward like an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
That may be the case, but there are, I think you've mentioned it here, like physical realities around compute that you just have to there's power required.
Yeah.
So you may be able to increase cooling, increase density, but you still have to pull in the power, which would may be a limiting factor.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. This one says, could you please make videos on project management for data center migration to cloud? How should we start the project, and what things we need to consider before planning it? So I would say 2 things. One, we are not IT consultants at Data Center Hawk. So as far as like which applications should go where, that's really not what we do. But what would you say you do here, David? No, we did.
What is your job?
We did do a podcast. It's called Co-Location Done Right. I believe it was Hawk Talk 17 or Hawk Podcast 17.
Yep.
And you talk about just from a project success standpoint.
Yeah, sure.
The best approach to take. So I think it'd be great. Just give like a 30 or 45 second summary of that. Some of the things we talked about.
The first thing that like comes to mind is get the right people involved, which
it's not clear for data center projects, right?
Yeah.
And I would say everyone tackles this differently. Some people, it's the IT manager is the final decision maker.
Yeah.
Sometimes the CFO. Sometimes it's the real estate guy.
Well, yeah. So if I'm looking at it that way, I would say a couple things. One, internally, if you're at a company and you're trying to figure this out on your own, you've got to understand who the people are to have at the table. And you've just mentioned a number of them. You got to have your IT infrastructure team. You've got to have your people that are making financial decisions. You probably need to figure out how this is going to interplay with your like internal real estate, because you will have assets afterwards. Like a lot of companies today are finding that like these data center assets they're rolling out of or they're changing, all of a sudden they have this 10 megawatt facility that how can we repurpose it? So there's a number of people internally to get involved. I think externally too, you need to bring in partners that can help you understand that pathway. So there are like companies that do this, migration experts that can help you determine internally what you have. That's probably one of the hardest things companies had to figure out is like, what do we have internally and what needs to move? And once you get...
Know thyself.
Know thy what? Yes.
Know thy IT infrastructure.
That's right. That's right. No, but it's like, but I know that like that's a lot harder for organizations than you think. There's a lot that and not you, but just it's like easy to go. Like,
I know exactly what I have. It's nothing. So my project will be very straightforward.
Yes, of course we have we have this stuff, but then when you really have to figure it out, that's where you just need people that can help you come in and determine that, and then figure out like what cloud solution is best for you. If you get on, if you just get on like a cloud provider's website, just understanding, oh my gosh, there's all these different products.
It'll make your head spin.
Yeah, which one's the right one? Where should it be? So I would say,
if it makes you feel any better, question submitter guy that I think we've heard from a lot of different data center operators, like companies requesting shorter term, just almost like buy some time to figure that piece out.
Yeah,
it's extremely complex.
Yes,
it's extremely complex.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables.
All right, next one. This is going to be a fun one, easy for you, David. When a tenant pays $100 per kilowatt, what exactly is he paying for? In commercial real estate, the tenant is paying for the right to use the space, then there's expenses on top of that. In the data center industry, what is $100 per month per kilowatt included.
Is this from Mr. Kilowatt?
This is not from Mr.
Oh,
Kilowatt. This
okay.
is actually from JL.
Oh.
So well-known data center figure.
Oh, those are initials. Okay, very good.
Those are initials.
Got it. Yeah, so one of the things that I tell people that are trying to figure out the nuances of the data center space is if you're coming from the commercial real estate world, you're coming from like a square footage mindset. Everything is around like a price per square foot. And even in like the initial days of the data center world, you would get these weird quotes that you'd pay like a price per square foot and you'd pay a price for the power. It's very strange. Now, most data center operators have a pricing structure that is, as mentioned, $100 per kW per month. So what that allows you to do is it basically reserves you the infrastructure of that 100 kW, so 100 kilowatts, so that your equipment and your power could utilize 100 kilowatts, and that is what you have the right to use. And so that is basically your rental rate on your power infrastructure reservation within that data center facility.
So if you think of it like an office comp, it would be like it is truly like the analog is the space.
That's right.
Now you may not, even if you don't use all the space, you're still paying for it.
That's right.
You still got to bring your own desks,
You bet.
chairs, what have
Yep.
you in.
Yes, and so like in a typical like co-location facility, you would be within like your own environment where you have your 10 to 15 or 20 racks of servers, and they'd have the ability to pull up to 100 kW of power. Now, one known fact in the data center space is that data center operators typically oversubscribe their space because they know, or their power, because they know that data center users typically don't use. You cannot use up to that 100 kW, and so there's certainly more commitments than there is power in a lot of these data center facilities, but all of that $100 kW is really tied to your ability to utilize that infrastructure. So they might give you 10,000 feet, they might give you 500 feet, and I'm just saying that like to the data center operator, it's not about the space.
Yeah.
It's about the power. And
All right. Next is great information and very well produced. Thank you.
Thank
Rhett,
you.
that's more of an idea. Did you submit this question, Rhett? Man, whoever's producing your podcast does a great job. Submitted by Rhett G.
was that really?
in Dallas. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. That's not the actual deal. It says, I'm based in South Africa. I'm very interested in the African data center markets and future potential.
Oh.
Have you ever done any content related to the space?
Well, I would just say that actually going back to the comment about like servers, decreasing in size, and that like technology is getting better and all that stuff. One of the things that like a lot of times we don't consider is these secondary markets, or these markets that have tons of people that are like underserved as it relates to technology. And so, I would just say areas like Africa, areas like probably like Indonesia, India, with the amount of population size they have, and compared to the maturity of their digital infrastructure, is like way behind. So I think we'll see like tremendous growth in areas like that. What would you add to that?
Yeah, so while we don't cover Africa like on an in-depth, regular basis, we did do some kind of like high-level report, like research on them in the last 3 or 4 months ago. And so, a couple of stats that came out. So I think the size of the African data center market as a whole, I think we estimate is like in the 200 to 250 megawatt range. And so a couple of stats. So they're about 15% of the world's population, but probably 1 to 2% of its digital infrastructure. So I think that imbalance right there would be the opportunity.
Yes.
If you're just looking to have like, if you know nothing about the African data center market, so South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria are probably like the 3 biggest / key markets in that continent. So, but you do see, companies starting to make moves. They're like Amazon, I think, opened up a region in South Africa. Facebook's basically wrapping the entire continent in a big fiber ring. I think Digital, when they picked up Interaction, they got Milk, Eggs, and Interaction. They picked it up. They've got some assets in Africa. So,
It's just so
there will be certainly an I know that's such a bad joke. Edit that out, Rhett.
No.
There certainly will be opportunity there.
Yeah.
But I think, the challenges there are like workforce, reliable power, reliable, fiber infrastructure.
I mean, there's just, and as you like get into certain areas, I mean, there's a lot of business challenges that you would face. And so I would just say, one of the issues that people are, investors have in certain markets is really trying to figure out like, hey, I have money to invest, and like I'm going to look at my risk profile in different areas to invest it. And so, that certainly comes into play when you think about some of these secondary markets, these areas that have a lot of people but don't always have like a totally stable government,
like a highly skilled workforce,
yes.
or what have you. Yeah,
yes.
all those things. So,
great question from Rhett. Thank you.
Great question, Rhett.
Rhett
Keep
Gill.
up the great producing.
Man.
Another one. Thank you for providing this valuable information. Once again,
man,
not written by us.
So many fans.
Can you
out
explain
there.
to me tiering levels and what's the difference between obtaining the certificate from Uptime and TIA?
Oh yeah, yes. The tiering levels, tier 1 through 4, are really designed to drive standardization related to like design and reliability in the data center industry. And this is over the last 10 years in the maturity of the market. This has been really important at certain times and maybe less important in others. But when I would say like 2007 through 10, when I like first was in the data center market, you would hear a lot about like tier 4 construction. And I think what companies realized over time was that had levels of redundancy built into it that they found out they really didn't need. They didn't need to spend the capital on it. There was a tier 3 plus model that allowed them to be concurrently maintainable, meaning a side could be taken down and maintenance could be performed, and the other side that was up still had reliability. And that was okay. That solved some of the issues and reliability check marks that you needed to operate. So that's really what we've seen today is this tier 3 plus. But I would tell you in some of these bigger builds, we're seeing even less reliability or just some like creativity in the way that maybe the electrical infrastructure is deployed. So right now with like Uptime Institute is is the group that would certify. You pay a certain amount to have your both your design and construction certified as like tier 3 or tier 4 constructed. And that's typically what it's been. I think it's still, really important. There's some groups that choose to pay that cost to have the official stamp, some that don't, some like data center operators. But it is something that like if you're an end user or you're a financial company or you're a healthcare company, you have certain regulatory requirements you have to meet. You really have to dig in to make sure you understand. Just because someone says it's a tier 3 data center doesn't necessarily mean it is.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, there's, the uptime guarantee or the
Yes.
service level agreements are probably they're not going to override all that, but they're going to be more important than how you achieve that.
Yes.
So, all right. Next, which companies are most interested in being near a high-speed subsea cable? Is being near a high subsea cable of any value? Or what is the value of being near a high-speed subsea cable?
Yeah, I mean, it allows you to serve, maybe markets without being, potentially in that market, and it allows you to save from a latency perspective. So time. So I think that, certainly if you're trying to access, international markets, like being in an area that has those subsea cables allows you to maybe do some things from an application standpoint or whatever the function is that you're serving allows you to do it faster. There's some bigger companies I would say that have, there's bigger companies that have actually like funded their own subsea cables, so those companies would find those locations maybe more interesting than like an insurance company or something like that. But I would tell you that, I think the question was someone in like Virginia Beach, which has become a more mature subsea cable market. Another great example of that is in Hillsboro, Oregon, where we've seen a lot of growth. That's right outside of Portland. We've seen a lot of growth from some very large companies that have, not only a focus on the west coast of the U.S., but also in like the Asia Pac market. And some of those subsea cables come right into a few of the data centers out there. So all that to say, that subsea cable market is one to watch. And you're even seeing like a good example yesterday. I was on a call with Bill Fathers, the CEO of Cologix. He was talking about how Canada is now working to bring subsea cables straight into, from like the Canadian coast versus having to go through the U.S. to come up into Canada, really to drive more like data sovereignty and solving some of those issues. So that might be more than you wanted, but that's how we see those subsea cables really changing the market, and the locations and where they're located and where they go, very important.
Yeah, so it's somewhat application and company dependent, but for those companies that have the need, it's highly valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, we got the next couple are kind of related around like the connectivity piece. I'll try and bundle these together as much as I can. So, one is what's the value in being near like a regional internet exchange?
Yep.
I'm gonna rapid fire these. 2, how do a company like Megaport or Packet Fabric, play into that? And then 3, how do companies think about, building out their own, like they would invest in the fiber piece or invest in like a power substation, kind of around. Well, let's keep it to the fiber. Keep that third question limited to the fiber piece. So, value around the proximity to like internet exchange, Megaport / Packet Fabric, and then what are companies doing? How will they invest in those things?
Yeah, highly connected buildings are extremely valuable. We've seen that trend.
Tweet that.
There you go.
That's a tweetable statement.
I'm full of them.
You need to repeat it 2 or 3 times to make sure that people
can
type it into their Twitter feed in the middle of church.
That's right. So I think you can, if you look at like as an example, if you look at the cost per square foot of carrier hotels in the last 5 years being sold in the U.S., you'll see that price go up dramatically.
No.
And so that's just and these buildings too, other buildings get built around. Northern Virginia, DC2, it's right in Ashburn. And this is the building that like literally everything has been built around because of this conglomeration. Gosh, that's a big word for me, of fiber and network.
The student is becoming the master.
Oh, that's right.
Linguistically, at least.
There you go, David McCall. He's the one that.
Who it was?
Yeah, one time he's the one that was like, Mike uses these big words on your podcast. He's like, every time I just am taken aback by them.
Oh, great.
I appreciate it. Anyway.
That's my contribution.
There you go. So I would say we are seeing everybody we talk to, I mean, the network has become more and more valuable. How companies value, network. Fiber coming into a data center facility, typically like data center operators aren't saying like, hey, we will pay all these people to come. And typically what happens, they have a customer that has a request, and that's how they come into that facility. So that's like, traditionally how we've seen that. Fiber providers will typically pay to be in a building. But there are scenarios where, data center operators might, pay to do some things to get, more providers in there, but typically it's driven by the customer.
I think we got that question not formally submitted, but it's still valid here. It's still a question.
Appreciate that.
If you look at how does Amazon make a decision in concert with the operator to put an on-ramp in that facility?
Yeah.
And I think your response at the time was it kind of just, sometimes Google's got more incentive to be there than the operator, and so they may say, you're going to shoulder more of the cost. Sometimes it's the other way around. It really does vary on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. So I think that's the key to the development piece of those buildings from a fiber standpoint. I think on you mentioned Megaport and the regional exchange maybe. I mean, as it relates to how close they've got to be, it probably just depends on the company. But I think companies like Megaport are going to continue to grow because they provide a really valuable connection point for customers that are trying to get to more cloud providers.
But going back to an earlier question about tackling the cloud migration project, that's just another layer.
Sure.
You've got cost, you've got the infrastructure there, you've got the connectivity piece. All those are very important, and I think any company could weight all those differently. And so your decision matrix for this project, it continues to grow in complexity.
Yeah, I always tell people that are going through I guess it'd be a data center migration process, or when I was at CBRE and we were helping customers go from owned facilities co-location. You're looking at the things of value, there's always like, 80% of the value is in economics and reliability and partnership, all those things. There's like 20% for each company that is so important that typically sways the decision. Sways it because they have we had this big project and it served people in the Northeast, so it's got to be, or we had this, we couldn't be here, so we needed. I mean, there's just these. Each company has little things here or there that tilt the projects, and so that's, and some of it is around like network and connectivity. And I think this just goes to show that, it's interesting that you have these sheets full of questions and 4 of them are like about connectivity because of how important it's become. And I know we did a podcast on, didn't we do like what is data center connectivity?
Yeah.
So we can include that, but that it is something that will continue to be a leading part of the discussion for years to come.
Yeah. All right, so listeners, keep submitting the questions.
Hey, keep them coming, people.
We will get to them
this is good stuff.
As often as we can. I have one last question. This is from Mike in Dallas, who asks, David, great stuff. Appreciate the haircut and the polo. What is the optimal size coffee cup?
That's a great question, and probably to be discussed. I like coffee cups that are taller rather than wider.
Yep. You don't like the bowl of soul?
No, don't need it.
That's like
don't need it.
A pho bowl?
Don't need it. Yes. Anytime you're picking up your coffee bowl, a coffee cup, a coffee bowl like this, that's a problem.
It becomes a bowl at some point.
Yes. And I also like a...
so you're a vertical wall.
Yes. And I also like a handle that you potentially can go all 4.
Okay.
Yeah, some of this, anyway.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And then color, logo?
Sure.
Do you want stuff written on the inside that you can kind of read a short story or pun as you drink your cup of coffee? Is that where does that factor in your decision matrix, David?
Oh my gosh,
all 4
that's a great thing
that.
To
can you warm your hand a little bit?
End on.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Again, thank you for listening to Data Center Hawk Q&A. Keep the questions coming. We'll see you next time.